Okay, so this is for the cholim of Klal Yisrael and the ones that are recovering, the people recovering from the terrorist attacks and other cholim as well. Okay, so we're going to continue here. Next point we're going to go on to here is scheduling elective surgery before Shabbos. So the question is one allowed to schedule non-emergency surgery for the latter part of the week if it would necessitate Chilul Shabbos during the post-operative period? So the answer is as follows. While this issue is not raised explicitly in Shulchan Aruch, some contemporary poskim base their ruling on this question on the principle established in the Siman concerning embarking on a sea voyage before Shabbos. In ancient times, it was permitted to embark on a sea voyage at the beginning of the week, even though it was likely that by the time Shabbos arrived, one would find himself in a pekach nefesh situation and be forced to desecrate Shabbos in order to save his life. From Wednesday onward, it is forbidden to set sail. This is because 3 days before Shabbos are associated with the coming Shabbos. During those days, one must avoid any situation that could cause him to desecrate the coming Shabbos. Setting sail within these days is therefore like setting oneself up for Shabbos desecration. If, however, one was traveling for the purpose of performing mitzvahs such as visiting Eretz Yisrael, it was permitted to begin the traveling even at the end of the week, even if a pekach nefesh situation would likely arise and Chilul Shabbos would result from it. It's a bit longer, so let's continue part 2 next time.
Okay.
So basically,
I have a question.
Don't go on a sea voyage before Wednesday. I mean, after Wednesday.
I have a
including an after.
There's 2 questions that come up very quickly. The first question is when booking a flight, both domestic and international, what the implications are of this. Or if you're traveling, say you've got to go to Durban and you're traveling from Johannesburg, I generally don't like to drive on Friday in case the car breaks down. And then you're forced in the middle of the highway on Friday night. So I generally, when I used to drive to Durban, I wouldn't pick a Friday. That's number one. And
leave on Thursday. I mean, a flight you can leave on Wednesday and arrive on Thursday.
Flight's easy. And then the other thing is, in terms of elective surgery, there's surgery that isn't essential, where it's, you see, this is the definition that I've got, is that even my dad, who needed a back operation, was an absolute agony. It wasn't elective. No, it was mandatory, but it wasn't life-threatening at that point. He just was in agony and couldn't move. So too, when I needed surgery, I was in so much agony, I would have had it done on a Shabbos just to relieve that. So that wasn't essential. In other words, it wasn't like a person landed up in the ER with a bullet wound and you needed to go to the ER to save life. In other words, it's elected in the sense that you could wait a day or two, but you're in agony in the interim. So I'd be interested to ask a shaila in that respect. I'm just giving you from life experience that sometimes...
Yeah, sure, of course. No. If you're in such agony, why endure it more? Why?
Yeah, but I don't know if it's so clear, because there's a difference between the fact that they have to operate immediately to save your life, and the difference is they can wait 2 days. You'll just feel like you're in Gehenna. So I'd be interested what the definition of elective is. In other words, when you can elect the time even though you're in agony and you can't cope, or is elective purely a case of if it's non-emergency, like a bullet wound, gunshot wound sort of thing? Do you get what I'm saying in terms of definition? Does everybody hear the question?
Yeah. Can I just add something? Because what I did here is that if I heard this from Rabbi Abba, not specifically an answer to your question, but it's kind of indirectly. So what he said was, even if something's not 100% life-threatening, if there's any chance that you could die, if you're not feeling well, any chance that you could die, like you say, you could have waited 2 days. It's not guaranteed that you waited 2 days and you have the surgery, you would have survived. You might not have.
No, but Kevin, I probably would have, and so would my dad with the back. except he was
Yes.
at Gehinnom. So I'm saying then that's not a shala. If you could die, that's not a shala. That's life-threatening. That's not an answer.
Well, yours might have been life-threatening. Your dad maybe not, but because yours, you have issues, Damon. And yours is maybe not a good example, but your dad is a good example.
Yeah, but I think it would be interesting. Anyway, listen. Let's just we're on the 67th dive. I just wanted to cover. Gavin asked some one or two good questions yesterday, so let me just add clarity just quickly. Is that the Gemara, basically what issue we dealt with, there was a clause in the Mishnah that reads, one who steals after a thief does not pay the twofold payment. So what do we mean by that? Is that, okay, so here we got an issue, because legally, you only consider the full-fledged owner of an article when, number one, it's in your possession, okay? And the other one is, in other words, and the other one is that why does it have to be in your possession? Because you need to have that item under control to use as you please. That's the definition. So if you have somebody that took your car away, it's not in your possession. You might own the legal papers, but if you can't drive it, you technically don't own it because you're not deriving any benefit. So that's one criteria. The second criteria, so the original owner doesn't really own it anymore because he doesn't have it. The second criteria is the thief doesn't own it because he stole it illegally. So neither one really owns it. They're not full-fledged owners legally, okay? So what we learned here is the fact is that the Gemara is explaining as follows. Rav and Rabba have the same opinion, and they both feel that as far as despair is concerned, that on its own is effective enough to institute acquisition, whereas some of the other opinions say it's yush, despair mixed with a name change, a physical change, a change in domain, but Rabba and Rav seem to say despair affects acquisition on its own. They're the only two of that particular opinion, so they're very strong in terms of owner's despair. So Rav said that they didn't teach this in the Mishnah except with respect to where the second stole the stolen article prior to the original owner's despair. So what are we actually saying here? We're saying that the second thief isn't liable because at that point neither the thief nor the original owner is considered the owner. So therefore, if that particular case, there is no penalty payment. Do you get what I'm saying? Because if the original owner didn't despair of it, the thief that he started from doesn't really own it properly. So therefore, who does he make the double penalty to? He can't make it to the original owner, Gavin. This was in lieu of your question yesterday. Why? Because the original owner doesn't have possession of it. He can't make it to the thief who has possession because the thief didn't acquire it legally. So that double fold payment cannot be made to any party. And therefore, the second thief doesn't have to make that double penalty because the owner has not yet despaired. Make sense?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so it's a different case because after the original owner's despair, the first thief has acquired it. Why? Because we know very clearly that the thief has acquired legal title to the stolen article. Both Rav and Rabba hold that in 66a, that Yush alone affects the thief's acquisition of the stolen article. So when the original owner despairs of recovering it, it becomes the full-fledged possession of the thief. And as to answer Kevin's question, the original thief has to pay the monetary equivalent to the original owner if he's caught to trial. But he doesn't have to give back the original article if it's no longer in existence, especially if it's stolen by a second party. Now, what happens is when the first thief has acquired it, then what happens is the second thief pays the twofold payment to the first thief. Now, if you look at it, it might sound a little bit strange. Why doesn't he give it to the original owner? Gavin, I want to ask you. I want to see if you've been listening.
I wasn't focused 100%, but I can probably look it out. You say, why wasn't it?
I'm like a shark.
He
I
didn't
can
even-
smell blood. I can smell when there's somebody not concentrating 100%.
No, I wasn't. I'll be honest, I wasn't. And it's not that difficult, the section. Do you want to just repeat the last 30
Sure,
seconds and I'll give you
absolutely.
those? Sorry, I did use something for a second. I'll be honest. I don't know how you put me here.
No problem. All right. So what happens is the original owner despaired of it. Therefore, the first thief has acquired it. Okay, because Rav and Rabba both say that despair of the original owner affects acquisition for the thief. So the thief just has to give the financial equivalent. Now there's a second thief that's stolen from the first thief. So since now the first thief has acquired it through the original owner's despair, the twofold payment goes to the first thief. It's paid from the second thief to the first thief. So who gets the original payment back? So the first thief has to financially give the equivalent of the actual value of the article at the time of theft to the original owner, and he has to give the twofold payment back to the original owner. And the second thief, who stole it from the first thief, after despair set in from the original owner, has to give the twofold payment back to the first thief. So what happens, the moral of the story, if a thief gets stolen from and despair is kicked in, he'll recover his penalty payment that he paid to the original owner from the second thief. And the compensatory amount for what the article was worth is not paid. I don't know if that's paid to the first thief from the second thief or not, because it says it has to be stolen from his possession. So I'm assuming that both the penalty as well as the original payment, the second thief has to return the original article to the first thief. And the first thief, according to many opinions, even according to Rabba, if it's still intact, has to return it to the original owner. Are you following? So again, in summary, if despair is kicked in, then this first thief owns the article and he only has to pay financial equivalent back, okay, to the original owner. A second thief, after despair is kicked in, stole it from the first thief. He does at that point pay the twofold payment because the first thief has acquired it through the original owner's despair. He would then obviously have to compensate by either giving the cash equivalent of the principal amount. So when we say the twofold payment, he's saying that that twofold payment isn't in addition to the principal. Because remember, the twofold payment was both given the principal and the penalty that was equal the same. So if he stole 200 zuz worth of a TV set, a TV set was 200 zuz. Okay, so then what's happening is he has to pay 400 zuz, the 200 zuz for the TV and the 200 zuz as a penalty. Okay, so therefore he has compensated the original owner with the double payment, both in terms of the principal amount as well as the penalty. So that's number one. That's the second. The original owner has to then compensate the double payment to the original owner, because even though he owns it, he still has to pay any penalty that's due, as well as the principal amount. He just doesn't have to give back the original article. But according to most opinions, if the original article is intact, he gives back the TV set worth 200 zuz plus another 200 zuz cash. The second thief gives it to the first thief. Then the first thief should take the 200 zuz penalty from the second thief, give it to the original owner since he owes it anyway, and return the TV set to the original owner. The only time that the second thief doesn't have to pay the first thief a penalty amount is if the original owner hadn't given up on getting the article back. So then he returns the TV set, the principal, to the original owner. I'm assuming you wouldn't return it to the thief because you just kind of having to take it from the first thief back to the original owner. I'm assuming if they know the owner, just give the TV set to the original owner. But what would happen is, in that particular case, the double payment, which would be made to the original owner, would, no, I've just worked it out, guys. It wouldn't be given to the original owner. It has to go through the first thief, and I'll tell you why. Because it gets the first thief off the hook of paying the double penalty. In other words, if I, as the second thief, stole it from Gavin, who was the first thief, and then there's Kevin. Okay, if I give Kevin the TV set directly, because Kevin hasn't given it up, then that penalty would still be due to by Gavin. But the problem is Gavin now has scored 200 zuz because he doesn't have to give the original TV back. So what would happen is that either I give it to Gavin and Gavin has to make legal restitution by giving 200 zuz and the TV, or I give Kevin the TV and Gavin would have to make 200 zuz penalty payment, but not the original because it was returned. So I don't know in the legal process, just hang on, Gav, I don't know in the legal process if they circumvent the first thief and give it to the original owner, or do they make sure all or both of them appear at the trial and they hand it over simultaneously? What's your question, Gav?
No, it's more of an observation. Yesterday I was thinking about it, that there's possibly a loophole, and I think you cleared that up today, I think there's no loophole. You could take two thieves who could spread the two thieves work together. First one steals it. No one else knows that the second one's involved. The second one then steals it. But now what happens is, if it's one thief or if it's two thieves, they end up jointly paying the same amount.
Correct.
So there's no loophole.
I thought about that issue too, and that's why I wanted to reread details and commentaries to see that loophole was closed. Excellent, my friend. Excellent.
There's nothing. Hashem's unbelievable, though.
Hashem is clever. Okay. Yeah. So now that we know that rule, the Gemara challenges Rav's ruling from a brisa. Rav Sheshe said, I say that Rav stated this law when he was drifting into sleep. Otherwise, he never would have stated it. Now, again, when Rav Sheshe says this, it's not an insult to Rav. He's saying Rav is such a genius, he never would have made such an error, and therefore he's praising Rav and saying it must have been because he was tired. It's a nice way of saying I respect the man greatly, which he did. I just don't agree with his opinion. So what did he not exactly talk about? Did he not exactly say? Well, if you have a look, he brings a brisa Rav Sheshes, and where Rabbi Akiva said, why did the Torah state that if a thief slaughtered or sold the stolen animal, he pays the fourfold and fivefold payments? Because he became rooted in sin. So what's this concept that he became rooted in sin? It's that his sin became strengthened. For up to that point, the thief hasn't consummated the theft, so to speak. So when Rashi talks about a consummation of theft, what he's saying is, look, you got an animal and you slaughter it. Now, if there's a physical change that takes place where the owner where the thief kills the animal, it now belongs to the thief. And therefore, you cannot ever give that living, breathing animal back to the original owner. So what did he do? He not only stole it, but he made sure the original owner could never get it back. And that's called a habitual sinner. It's the same if the original thief sold it to a buyer, or perhaps sold it to somebody else. Now, the original owner at that point cannot get the animal back. Does that make sense? So at the point where he can't make that rectification, yes, there's a certain amount of teshuva that can be done with a financial equivalent. But that sort of callous act is deemed to be a habitual sinning. Because it's one thing if one steals something and then you feel bad and you return it. In this case, the person didn't care that the original person could get it back. Okay, because it will now never return to the original owner. So that's why the term is he became rooted in sin. And it's because of that that teshuvah was instituted. Otherwise, the person would never get cleansed. Now, if you look at Rabbi Akiva's case, when was it sold by the thief? If you want to say that prior to the original owner's despair is there, then a rooting in sin that results from the sale. In other words, what it's saying is that does the thief selling the stolen animal prior to the owner's despair affect acquisition and consummate the theft? What do you think, guys?
Well, the owner's not aware that it's even missing. So if he's not aware it's missing, then what we've learned so far, the majority hold that you can't transfer ownership because there's no despair yet. So you need both. You need despair and you need transformation. So the transformation here would be the slaughtering. But if there's no despair and you just have the one, then from what I've heard, I don't think it works.
Okay, so there is a bit of a different case here for one reason, which we're going to get to. A physical change does affect acquisition. Okay.
Even without despair.
Yeah, we learned that. Okay, but
sorry, I wasn't sure if we had learned that. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. We learned it with the case of a zav. We also learned it with the case of where somebody stole wool and made it into a jersey or something like that. We learned it with the coin and the fish shearings, etc. So,
but did we learn it without despair though?
Yes, despair came off.
I thought they were all with despair. So that's what I do remember the examples. I thought they were all with despair. So that's my mistake.
No, where you're getting it right, where you are getting it right is apart from Rava and Rav, others say that despair alone doesn't affect acquisition. There either has to be a change in name, change in location, or a physical change. Only Rav and Rabba say a despair alone affects acquisition.
And some say you need both.
Yes, but you can have, what they say is you can have a physical change. You can have a physical change technically. Most opinions are you can have a physical change without despair, but you can't have despair without physical change. We learned that in the beginning. In 66
I'm not sure I understand you on that. But it's fine, continue. It's fine.
Okay, because what we did, if you remember, there was a discussion, okay, with Rav Chisda and Ula. And that discussion was, hang on a second, is there a fourfold and fivefold payment that is required if you slaughter an animal and that makes a physical change? And there was an argument that said, well, do you pay the penalty or not? And the reason why it says, well, why wouldn't you pay the penalty? Because the question arose that since that physical change took place, it's now the thief's animal that he slaughtered it. So why should he pay the penalty? He's slaughtering his own animal. That was the discussion that came up.
Yeah, no, I remember that. So I want to ask you, how many people, how many of the Gedolim hold that you need despair and change of thing in order a change of composition in order for it to be a. I mean, there are Gedolim that hold that as well, right? That you need both.
Well, most of them say, look, even that fourfold or fivefold payment that kicks in is a slightly different issue. And what that issue was that they held, even according to, I mean, if you look at Beis Shammai basically said, you're creating a sin, and then you can't do a mitzvah with that sin. So if you stole something, you can't benefit by getting out of a fourfold or fivefold payment. Even though it does affect acquisition, you're not going to be rewarded for it. Therefore, you'd still have to pay the 4 or 5-fold payments. In other words, even though technically you're right, and the person does hold that it affects acquisition for the thief, and since it's his animal, why would he have to pay the 4-fold or 5-fold payment? He cannot get away with the theft and use that as an acquisition in order not to pay the penalty payment. Because number one, Gavin, nobody would leave an animal alive. If that got them off the hook for the 4 or 5-fold payment, they'd slaughter it immediately because of the physical change. So even those that hold that physical change affects ownership for the thief, what it's saying there is the 4 or 5-fold payment would have to be made then in cash. Even those that hold that it affects acquisition, it doesn't get them off the payment. What it says is you'd have to pay the cash since it's your animal, but it doesn't get you off.
But it's not a valid, like what you're saying, it's not a valid acquisition.
Correct. It's done through an avera. It's done through an illegal act.
It's done through an avera, yeah.
Exactly. So that was the thing. And what was the proof? It says, well, you calculate the penalty at the time of theft, which means if the animal was stolen at a calf and we let it mature into an adult, you pay the penalties at the time when the animal was a calf, which means you still pay penalties. You just don't pay penalty for the adulthood. So you pay the principal plus the penalties, but not for the maturation. You know, there was that whole discussion, etc. What we're dealing with now is a case where it says, okay, so if you want to say exactly that there wasn't despair, okay. In other words, the thief selling the stolen animal prior to the owner's despair, surely that should affect acquisition and consummate the theft. And the reason, Gavin, you're correct, is it's not the case, because all opinions agree, this is according to Rashi, that a change of domain from the thief's domain to a buyer's domain prior to the original owner's despair does not affect acquisition. Meaning, basically, you're talking about a case here where, say, for example, you're selling it to another buyer. That's an invalid sale. Does that make sense? And so too with the slaughtering, it doesn't get you off the penalties either. So there are opinions like, for example, Rav and Rabba that say different. They say, according to them, it must refer to where the thief sold the animal after the original owner's despair. So what it's proposing is in which case the owner's despair in conjunction with a subsequent change of domain. In other words, from the thief's domain to the buyer's domain, that affects acquisition and consummates the theft. So there's opinion that says that that's the case, but the problem is then you've got to kind of wait. You've got to kind of, even according to that opinion, wait for the despair to kick in and then change the domain. And then both of those might affect the acquisition. But it doesn't get the thief off the hook, because what happens then is through an illegal act, he would still have to pay the financial equivalent, even if he doesn't bring the animal back. So the question is in the Gemara is as follows, okay? So I'll just say to you, if you look at Rabbi Akiva's case, it says, if you would say that the thief sold it prior to the original owner's despair, is there then a rooting in sin that results from the sale? Rather, it must refer to where the thief sold the animal after the original owner's despair. And if it should enter your mind to say that despair alone affects acquisition, then why does he pay the 4-fold and 5-fold payment altogether? Why? It is his own animal that he's slaughtering. It is his own animal that he's selling. So this is Rabbi Akiva's proof against Rabba and Rav. Because remember, Rabba and Rav say that despair alone affects acquisition. And this so from Rav Sheshes brings a proof from Rabbi Akiva that says, look, if the animal is sold, why would there be a 4-fold or 5-fold payment if despair affects acquisition? In other words, the guy waited the owner to have despair, right? He then sold it to the buyer. So both the change of domain happened from the thief to the buyer, as well as affecting despair. So in other words, it's not staying at the thief. So that change of domain also plays a role, because it's a change, like a physical change or a name, as well as despair. But Rav Sheshes' argument using Rabbi Akiva is saying, well, then it doesn't make sense to say that despair alone affects acquisition. Even if you wanted to say change of physical domain, why? because the thief, Gavin, still pays the fourfold and fivefold payment. That's the problem, which is a very good argument that Rav Sheshes is bringing. Okay? So it says whether you sell it or slaughter it, that payment still occurs, because A, it's an illegal act, and if it's an illegal act, it proves that despair doesn't affect acquisition. So the Gemara deflects the challenge. They said it is as Rava said in reply to a different challenge. Okay? So when the Brisa says because he became rooted in sin, it means because he has sinned repeatedly. Here too, with respect to the challenge, say the Brisa means because he sinned repeatedly. So let me just explain to you what it meant in the first example of he sinned repeatedly. If you remember the first example, it means that, Gavin, if I stole something and I sold it, I ain't getting it back, so I can't give it to the original owner. If I slaughtered it, it's made a change. I can't give a living animal back to the original owner. Because of that change of location or that change of status of the animal from living to dead, it's affected acquisition, and I can't give it back to the original owner, and that's the problem, okay? And therefore, I must make the fourfold or fivefold payment in cash, because the animal's not there to do anything, okay? So, in other words, even the principal I must make back in cash. But there's a different discussion being just stated, excuse me, guys, I got hiccups, by Rava. Rava is saying they're very similar to Beis Shammai. So Beis Shammai is saying that when you sin repeatedly, you have to pay the four or fivefold payment. It's because you sin repeatedly, not because it doesn't affect acquisition. So in other words, even whether despair kicked in or not, it doesn't make a difference, because the person's ability to sin is what's causing him to pay the fourfold or fivefold penalty, because he's made sure now the original owner can't get it back. Do you get what I'm saying? And even that being not the case, the fact that he did an illegal act cannot affect an acquisition. So accordingly, the Brisa can in fact refer to where the thief sold the stolen article or animal prior to the owner's despair, or even afterwards. The Brisa, therefore, in no way proves that despair alone does not affect acquisition. We're not sure yet. Okay. Now, in Shemot chapter 21, verse 37, there is a specific verse, and it says, if a man shall steal an ox or a sheep and he slaughters or sells it, just as the act of slaughtering stated in the verse refers to a slaughtering that does not revert. Guys, why does it not revert? Because once you kill the animal, how are you going to return a living animal to the owner? You can't. So too, the act of selling stated in this reverse refers to a sale that does not revert. Why does it not revert? Because the thief doesn't have it. He gave it to a different buyer who purchased it from him, and it's no longer in his domain. So then the thief did. Now, when did the thief execute such a sale? So if you're going to say that he sold the animal prior to the original owner's despair, then why does the sale not revert? In other words, it's saying exactly as Gavin said, that if it's an illegal sale, the buyer doesn't get it. Remember when we learned there was a property lien, and the person that was in debt sold the property, it said that the onus is on the buyer to check that there are no liens on the property to a debtor. We learned that. So to here, the buyer has to check it's not stolen items, the sale won't go through. So rather, it must be where the thief sold the animal after the owner's original despair. So what that's saying is, in that case, by the time the stolen article entered the buyer's domain, it's undergone both despair, which affects acquisition according to Rav and Rabba, and a change of domain according to other opinions, and is therefore legally acquired by the buyer, as explained by Rashi. So then, if it should enter your mind to say that the thief acquired the stolen animal through despair alone, then why does he pay the fourfold or fivefold altogether? Because it's his own animal that he's selling. In other words, we want to know, again, why, if you've acquired it, would you have to pay a penalty on your own animal? We understand why you'd have to pay the principal. But at the point where you acquired the animal through the physical change or despair, you shouldn't have to pay the fourfold and fivefold animal because it's your animal you're slaughtering. So the Gemara deflects the challenge. It's stated by Rav Nachman in reply to a different challenge. The Brisa says one is liable only for a sale that does not revert. It doesn't mean to exclude a sale that will revert because it's not legally binding. Rather, it means to exclude a sale that reverts because it was stipulated that the sale should be for a limited time, such as 30 days. Here, too, with respect to this challenge, you may answer that the Brisa means to exclude a sale that was only for 30 days. So this doesn't prove that despair alone doesn't affect acquisition. It doesn't prove it because it seems that the sale does go through because the owner despaired, as well as a change of location from the thief to the buyer. So this isn't a proof against Rav or Rabba. What it's saying is the reason the sale does not stick isn't because it's not now acquired by the thief, but because the terms and conditions of the sale were breached. In other words, there was a 30-day cooling off period, or it was going to be rented for purchase and something fell through in the deal. So in other words, the deal wasn't killed because it was an illegal sale. It was when despair occurred and a location occurred that affected acquisition for the thief. Again, the thief has to pay the original owner the principal back and the opinions as to whether or not there's a fourfold and fivefold payment. We've seen that in all cases there is. But the argument of the Gemara is, why should there be, since it's now acquired by the thief through despair or a change of location or both? And the reason being is, as Gavin said, it's an illegal act. But the Gemara is saying here it's not an illegal act because otherwise the sale wouldn't go through. So this doesn't prove that despair affects acquisition, and it doesn't prove that despair does not affect acquisition. We don't know yet. But it can't prove it either way yet. Do you understand?
Can I just give you my humble opinion just on what I've heard? But I've obviously have a few gaps in between. I don't have it as well as you do. In my humble opinion, I don't see how it's possible for a product a stolen product to be acquired by the thief unless there's despair. And I'll tell you why. And I know it's only Rabba and the other guy who says it. And the reason why I say that is because you'll never know it's lost. So if you got 5,000 sheep and a guy steals one, you'll never know. So unless you despair, acquisition can never take place, or acquisition happens by default because you never going to know it's missing, and the guy just takes over ownership. So we'll talk about that tomorrow, but I think that's...
Please bring it up tomorrow. I've got the answer for you. I'll bring it up tomorrow. We've got less than a minute left.
Yeah, because I can see there's not enough time. That's for...